Hello, and welcome to this week's Rights in Russia interview on the situation for human rights defenders in Russia. And today, we are lucky that our guest is Karinna Moskalenko, one of the leading Russian human rights lawyers and a member of the Moscow Helsinki Group. She litigates in Russian domestic courts and is specialized in litigation before the European Court of Human Rights. She won the first ever case against the Russian Federation that was heard at the European Court. Today, she leads the work of the Strasbourg-based International Protection Center, a nonprofit organization which she founded in 1995. The center has won more than 500 cases at the European Court of Human Rights, of which she herself has won more than 100. Among the cases she has taken to the court are those of the victims of politically motivated killings, including Anna Politkovskaya and other journalists, the victims of the Nord-Ost tragedy, and many victims of torture. She has also defended such prominent individuals as Mikhail, Khodorkovsky, and Garry Kasparov. Karinna is an honorary member of the International Commission of Jurists, and among her many awards, she received the Ludovic-Trarieux International Human Rights Prize in 2010 and an honorary Doctor of Law from the Southern Methodist University in Texas, US. Thanks for joining us, Karinna. It's such a pleasure to see you again.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we have a series of questions to guide the interview, which should take about 30 minutes. So if you're ready, let's get started.
Let us try, but I'm so sorry. In my age, I became so talking that please interrupt me when I'm too much saying.
Okay, that's a deal. So
very, very talkative. Those lawyers, you know, they used to be very, very talkative.
Yes. So first of all, I'm curious about your career path. So why did you become a lawyer in Russia, and in particular, a human rights lawyer?
You probably know that I started to be a lawyer in 1970s. That was not Russia, that was the Soviet Union. I committed a terrible mistake because I couldn't even imagine what it means to be a lawyer. Just I didn't want to pretend to be an actress. And everybody said, Karinna has to become an actress. And in order to disappoint everybody, I started to prepare myself to the State University in Leningrad, St. Petersburg. And that was absolutely impossible. Now I realize that, but at that time, being a girl, very naive girl from Pskovskaya Oblast, from very small city, which calls Ostrov Island. I decided that if I want to become a lawyer, I certainly have to. And I came to big city, Leningrad, and I came and I started to prepare myself for the exams, and I thought that I'm going to become a very strong prosecutor who is going to fight the criminality, and you know, that was my initial idea. But during my university course, on the advice of my professors, I decided to become an advocate. I still didn't know what means to be an advocate. And I graduated Leningrad University at 1976. And I asked, my family at that time moved from Leningrad to Moscow. And I asked the Moscow City Bar to accept me as a candidate, as a stagiaire. And I started my stage. And after 1 year of practical work, I was completely disappointed in the regime of the Soviet Union. I still remained, you should know that I was very naive. I even wanted to be a member of the Communist Party, to struggle for and to fight for everything good against everything bad. Yeah, I was really very, very naive. And I thought that the Soviet Union has been created for the well-being of everybody, and I was very proud to be but after 1 year of my practical work, I decided that I will never support this regime, because even my very humbling practice, my first year of training, of doing the first criminal cases, it showed me that the whole system is completely wrong. That was a big tragedy for me. And what I did, I was lucky. I had very good teachers, tutors, my colleagues who invited me to the very serious trials. And in these trials, I realized more and more that we need to change the system of in humanity, in injustice, everything like this. And for me, the situation with prisoners was absolutely intolerable, especially because my first years, I was doing only cases. I visited only those prisoners who stayed in jails, in preliminary detention. And I couldn't realize, remaining to be very naive, why these people who, according to the Constitution and the criminal procedural law, they are innocent. They are still innocent. Nobody proved their guilt, and why they should be treated in such horrible way, even worse than those who stay in colonies, in prisons. So these CISO, the centers for detainees before the judgment, before the sentence, the situation was absolutely unacceptable. I really suffered with that. Mm-hmm. And you know, when the Perestroika, as we call her at this time, came, that was very, I would say, natural, that with the assistance of my friends, Valery Abramkin, Yuri Schmidt, unfortunately, none of them now alive, but they made a lot of efforts to explain me all the system and of human rights ideas and principles. And that was quite natural for me, that I started to defend rights of prisoners. And then after that, when I failed in some cases, I suddenly decided to find a way how to go further than the Supreme Court of Russia, for example. And with the assistance of some of my tutors, I started to learn human rights law and practice in Birmingham University. And after the Birmingham University, I was lucky to start my placement in London. And during this practical work, I decided that we have to create exactly the same human rights organization, which assists people to go to the European Court. The problem at that time, 94, that Russia was not accepted at the Council of Europe. We were refused. I mean, the country was refused to be a member. But at that time, I should say that Russian authorities were very serious in their intention to comply with all the commitments and seriously change the legislation in order to be accepted into the Council of Europe. And in 1998, that was a great event when on the 5th of May, we deposed, the Russian Federation deposed the special documents saying that we obtain these obligations, commitments, and we are ready to follow the requirements of the convention. The convention became my favorite book. It is a very small book. After that, many volumes of the case law of the European Court became my lovely books, and I started to explain people in Russia that this is probably our future, how we can improve the situation in Russia. We have to bring individual cases to the court, because many resolutions cannot bring such a practical effect, like one single judgment on one single case, when the authorities must follow the judgment because it is binding, and nobody wanted to understand that this is really binding, how it is possible.
So you were talking about the convention, right? And how this was such a victory, and at the beginning of your career, right? Yeah. And it's really great to get this historical view of how things were changing when you were actually part of the system. And I'm wondering, as you look at things now, so the courts now in Russia, the domestic courts, so how are they different, or are they different from the courts in Soviet times? I mean, do you see differences?
Yes, they are different, but they are not better, unfortunately. In some, for some extent, it's even worse. You know, it's not easy to explain, but the system started to change in early 90s. Even in the late 90s, that was okay. And the judges suddenly started to realize that they are independent and they can do what they found necessary, and they can decide in a proper way. But in 1999 and beginning of 2000, that was visibly deteriorating all the situation. And I think it was a new political will, I would say, like this, because not because I'm afraid to call some names, but I don't like it. I would prefer to remain on the very legal stand, on the legal basis, and looking at as a person working in judicial system, I have noticed that the authorities started to go to another way. Especially for me, that became clear in 2003, when some people from Yukos have been apprehended. My client, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, have been arrested, and many people at that time couldn't realize if it is really serious attack on people like this, independent. I mean, you can say whatever, you can respect or not, love or not, these people like Garry Kasparov, or another my client, or Mikhail Khodorkovsky, or some journalists whom I defended at that time in their freedom of expression arguments against the authorities. But what I realized at that time, you don't need at the first period of changing the direction of the development of the country, you don't need to arrest everybody. Just arrest the most courageous, the most rich, the most independent, and all other business people would realize what is all this about. And you don't need to arrest all the journalists or all the oppositioners. Just arrest Garry Kasparov, and all other oppositioner would find this chilling effect. Or you don't need to kill everyone, but if you kill my friend, my dear friend Anna Politkovskaya, you can be sure that all others would find this signal to the society and to them, to each of them, everybody of them. And since the 2003, 2005, 6, everybody could notice that the situation has dramatically changed, dramatically. It is irreversible change, irreversible. It's still possible to come back to the same development which we had in late 90s, but look at the judicial system. You asked me about the courts. Yes, they are different. They now have good buildings, high salaries. We fight it for their rights because we said if they are so poor, they are very easily could be, I mean, it's wrong. They need to be independent, but the more they supplied with beautiful buildings, good salary and things like that, they became less and less independent because the authorities showed openly that when the judge is independent, take the decision which is not with which the authorities are not happy, he could be or she could be easily dismissed. In this sense, one of my cases, the only judge who won the case at the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg was Olga Borisovna Kudeshkina. And so many judges were looking on her destiny, on the result of our struggle in Strasbourg, fight against the judicial authorities, wanted to dismiss her, and they dismissed her. They stopped her activity as soon as she started to claim the independence, the impossibility of the president judge of the Moscow City Court to push, to interfere in her activity. And as soon as she went to the public, she was immediately dismissed. But we won the case at Strasbourg, at Strasbourg Court. And the Strasbourg Court established very important case law. But that was a little bit late because the authorities at that time, they knew that they have a new course, as they call it, and this new course, this new direction of their development was very, very depressing. And it didn't stop our team to continue our cases at the European Court. Why? Because without that, people were completely hopeless. But with the judgment of the European Court, we could defend people and continue after this judgment because of some provisions of the criminal procedural code in Russian legislation to start the trial again, to redress those who were victims of torture, to show the authorities that their actions are not impune, completely impune. On the national level, they felt really, they enjoy this impunity, I'm sorry. But when the case was decided by the European Court and the Russian authorities knew that this is binding, anyway, they knew that there is something out of their will and out of the country which can help, and they started to, let's say, to hate this mechanism. But for people, for ordinary people, because we defended this, as you mentioned, for more than 500 cases. Two of them maybe are Khodorkovsky and Kasparov. The third is Kudeshkin. Others, they are just ordinary people. And they knew that they have a last resort, and other people, they knew with these examples that they still have some hopes if they go to the European Court. And the European Court became a very popular court instance among Russian people.
And I'm wondering, just in terms of the sort of the substance of these cases, what are the main human rights issues in Russia today that you're dealing with in your legal cases?
Most of my cases, they are cases about torture. It's impossible to do other cases when you see how many people are suffering of horrible type of treatment. Another priority, it's a group of cases which we started, by the way, in Kasparov versus Russia. It's about freedom of expression and freedom of assembly and meetings and rallies. And the role of Kasparov case is really outstanding, because that was the first and for many years the only case where we won against the will of the authorities to restrict, to ban, to prohibit some rallies or some demonstrations. But unfortunately, in this type of cases, the authorities are the most naughty, and they don't want to follow this judgment. After Kasparov and others, there were now, I would say, hundreds of cases on the same issue. And if the authorities would take seriously Kasparov case, we would not have many victims of Bolotny case, where people were arrested, let's say apprehended, and put in jail for nothing, for the peaceful protest, for which they have all the rights according not only thanks to the convention, but in our constitution, it is clearly indicated this right and impossibility to impose the restrictions not in according to the law, not means in this sense, I would say, refer to the constitution as a main law and not the small law which says something unimportant. The constitution here is the most important thing. And then it has to pursue the legitimate aim, which is really lack in all these cases. And plus to this, even these restrictions made in accordance with the law and so-called legitimate aim, still it is impossible to impose these restrictions if it is not absolutely necessary in a democratic society. So these three standards have to be met, but the Russian authorities still don't care. No, they care. They know about that, but still supporting the today's regime in their intention to stop all the protests, to stop this process of protests, in principle, to prohibit everything, they continue to not respect this case law, obligatory, binding case law. They don't respect that. And in some cases, we still are very successful, because if the majority of my cases, eventually these cases about unfair trial, even cases, torture cases, even cases on freedom of expression or freedom of assembly, articles, other unfair trial is a central case about torture, about illegal prohibition of rally, let's say, any of this case finally goes to the local court. And if domestic court is unfair, then you again can go to the European Court on Human Rights, especially those accused in committing crimes when the crime was inspired or fabricated, or all these cases where people had no fair trial, they can go to the European Court with the only Article 6. And on the basis of Article 6 of the Convention, fair trial, right to fair trial. If they win this case, they, according to the Russian law, have the right to retrial, on new trial. And after this new trial, somebody was acquitted, somebody was released, and people know about these examples, and they urge to go to the European Court to defend them. Otherwise, they have no any hopes. With this, let's say, tool, they still have some hopes. That's why we do not stop, we do not want to stop our activity, because even some of the prisoners, some of the accused, and some of the convicted people who were really victims of unfair trial, they still have hope that when the system would be changed, or the regime would be changed, they are the first candidates to be retried and to be released. And so we live like this. I mean, it's not too much, but at the same time, it's huge, because it is our hope.
You mentioned adhering to the Constitution. In 2020, Russia amended its Constitution. And what are the effects of these changes, if any, do you see in your work?
In practice, very miserable things have been changed. That was just games from the authorities, and these games, they brought the wrong information that ostensibly the European Court is not any valid for anyhow valid for Russia. It's not like this, because there are two parts of our constitution. The first, general principles, and the second, all the rights which have to be protected. And these two first parts remain unchanged. And Article 15 of the Russian Constitution says about the priority of the international law and international treaties where Russia is a part of. Of course, the Russian authorities, they can at any moment say that we withdraw our participation in the convention, but they didn't want. Many people don't realize why, but they don't want, and they didn't want in last year when the participation of the Russian delegation in Parliamentary Assembly was on the question. And we have noticed there in Strasbourg and here in Moscow, we have noticed that the Russian authorities avoid to say we're not willing to implement this or that judgment of the European Court. So they still keep their participation and they demonstrate that no negligence, just different attitude, the different approaches. We would decide, we would salute, we would think on, and every time, 4 times per year, they reporting as all other authorities at their Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe about the implementation of judgments. And I would say they are not diverse authorities, and they are trying to do not be diverse. They every time have something to report in sense of the implementation, and it shows that unless they demonstrate at the national level, they don't care, any day they can leave the Council of Europe. It's not like this. And we have to use this situation in favor of our citizens, of our victims, of our people. And Russian people now have noticed that unless the authorities every time say we don't care, they still reporting to the European Court about those cases, and they are reporting to the Committee of Ministers about the implementation of the judgments. Of course, they have some sneaky methods to avoid some responsibility. But if you go to the website of the Committee of Ministers, you can notice many, unfortunately not so many, but a lot of memorandums on non-implementation. And I'm so proud that my lawyers in Strasbourg prepared those brilliant memorandums saying each time that unless the authorities said this judgment been already executed, we emphasize no in sense of the general measures. Yes, they pay compensation, for example. Yes, they quash the judgment, and after that the person could be released or acquitted. In some civil cases, in big group of civil cases, the destiny of people became much better, and the authorities reported about that. And we support them in all these efforts, saying that there are some other cases where they did not take all necessary steps and measures.
Do you think there's any danger that Russia would leave the Council of Europe, or that the Council might expel Russia?
Oh, it's a very complicated question. I was among 5 initiators of the letters to the 3 letters to the members of the Parliamentary Assembly, calling all these members of Parliamentary Assembly do not take this decision to expel Russia from the Council of Europe. We realize that in many aspects, in many cases, Russia does not demonstrate best will or goodwill in doing correct things. But still, for Russian people, for my clients, for my people, it could be disaster if the last instance of their justice would be just Supreme Court of the Russian Federation. Then they are hopeless. I'm sorry to say that, but it is like this. Just recently, I had a speech before the Presidium of the Supreme Court of the Russian Federation, and they said, look, in many cases, you quash the judgment. Why did not you do that in this case? Because it is politically motivated case. But at least for other people, it still works, and it is important. It is important. I realize that probably we deserve to be expelled, but I hope we will still, the authorities today, this one people, another, next day it's going to be the next person or another person. Unfortunately, we have no free elections now, because I don't trust in all these statistics and figures. And I would say in one case, we have proved all the corruption of the system of election, Davidov and others versus Russia. And with this case, we can prove that the system doesn't work well. And because of this system, we still have the same State Duma and the same president. But, Russia existed before this president, and it certainly would exist after this president. So we need to be tolerant. I'm not a tolerant person at all, but I push myself to realize that otherwise we would not have hopes for our people. So we should keep doing, we're keeping doing.
You mentioned the memorandum that your brilliant young lawyers had submitted to the European Court, and we hear a lot about young lawyers in Russia today. And so why are there so many good young lawyers that are interested in human rights?
Unfortunately, not so many. But if they decided to work in this field, they are so courageous, they are so fair, they are so brilliant. I'm really proud of that. There are now some of groups like our center. Previously, we were the only. Now it's lawyers from Memorial, lawyers from Moscow Helsinki Group, lawyers from over there, and four other people. They are so fair, so courageous. Now we work in this direction. I hope it's going to be better and better.
Mm-hmm. Great. That's a good note to end on. We so much appreciate you giving this time to this interview, Karinna. I know we've only touched the surface of the precedent-setting work that you do, but we have to conclude. And I just want to thank you for this really rich discussion and the benefits of your expertise. And I hope you'll accept our best wishes for the continued impact in the future.